This is Family Electric Go here live at Ferguson for the first time. Welcome to the Family Electric. How you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we love to talk to people about this. We've been on the air since 2018. This is actually episode, if we go check, this is 903. This is
Oh,
Family
wow.
Electric Ghost 9, episode 3. We've been tracking it on Apple. We've been around almost to our 1,000th episode pretty soon. For some time this year, we'll probably hit that. So we're happy about that. So thank you for being on the show. And you can listen to us on Newsly. We are a featured podcast on Newsly, 2.0 Go with free premium subscription. And we will be on Newsly later tonight. So you can check us out there. So again, one of the things we like to talk about is like give the focus of this today's show. So what we want to bring up is I think this is the topic I wanted to talk about
Yeah.
is how to deal with trauma while surrounded by it.
Yeah, that's a fun topic to talk about. So let's just go ahead and dive in. Um, trauma, I'll go ahead and just first say I'm Becca. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Northwest Arkansas, and trauma is actually my specialty. So that's what I do for a living is I listen, work with women of all ages, well, adult women of all ages, and help them understand how their past is affecting their present and work through all the traumas that they've gone through. And so, how to work with trauma while you're surrounded around it is like such a difficult thing to process because, especially when, a lot of the clients that I have are women in the helping field. And so they're constantly, triggered and working through a lot of stuff. And so, yeah, trauma is a complicated topic for sure.
So if you're working with like people in the medical profession, like nurses and doctors, and do you have people that they deal with that so much that they need to have like a different level of therapy because it's not just in their own lives, they're just witnessing all this trauma from all other people's lives, and it must get overwhelming.
Oh yeah. So I'm actually there's different levels of mental health care, obviously, just like there's different levels of healthcare in general, right? But mental health care has outpatient and inpatient care, and I've worked in both forms of care. So outpatient is your run of the mill going to therapy for an hour and then going back home, and inpatient is usually what we see when people are suicidal or homicidal, or we get a lot of homeless people that come in to inpatient facilities that are having mental health problems, those things of those nature. Working with people in the medical profession, I work with a lot of therapists when I'm providing therapy, which I think is like a big part of it because therapists need therapy, right? We listen to people's worst
Hmm.
traumas all day long, the things that they wouldn't tell other people. And so I work with a lot of therapists, and yeah, it definitely can get overwhelming. It doesn't mean that we don't love our job, it doesn't mean that we don't love what we do, right? It just means that sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, how many, like you hear the same story over and over and over and over again, right? And then you're like, um,
Hmm.
we call it burnout, is what we call it, right? Where
Yeah,
we're
I would wonder,
listening
yeah,
to
how
the
you
same
process
thing.
that.
Yeah. And so burnout really is processed through um, consistent care. So, when and I hate using the word normal, right? But when I have like a quote unquote normal client that walks into my
Hmm.
office that's not in the helping profession, that's just, has your normal run of the mill 9 to 5 job, right? I expect for them to, work through the things that they're going through, and then eventually I'll discharge them from sessions because, like, they've got this, they know what they're doing. But when I'm working with people in the helping field, I really don't ever expect for them to need to leave therapy because we're getting what we constantly, yeah,
Yeah.
we're constantly triggered by things, right? So our skills get better for sure, and we recognize like, hey, this is a trigger versus this is something that's really happening to me, right? But it's something that is constantly that we're working through all the time. And
Yeah.
so I'm not ashamed. I always tell people I'm the therapist that goes to therapy, and my therapist, like, she is very straightforward with how I process things. She knows me really well. She helps me work through a lot of the problems that I'm going through. And then she's just able to tell me, like, hey, this is not what's happening to you. Like, this is happening to your client. And so it's more of like separating yourself from the reality of the
Yeah.
situation and not allowing yourself to go back there.
Yeah, it's kind of like this separation you have to do. Like, if you're like a method actor, you get into these roles, you have to come out of it. You
Oh,
have
yeah.
to have some kind of when you're a musician. Sometimes we get into the problem where we get into method acting. We get into this like theatrical thing where that person on stage isn't exactly us. It is a
Oh,
version
yeah.
of us, but it's usually exaggerated. It's exaggerated, and you have to
Yes,
get out of it. And a lot of times you have to go to therapy because you have to find a way to get out of it. Sometimes you can't get out of it. You get stuck
for
in the
sure.
character you created. And then I would think if
Yes.
you're listening to stories all the time, you get numb to the story, and you're not supposed to be numb to the story because you're supposed to be helping. So
Oh,
how
right.
do you keep from getting numb or hearing that too much and not giving them the service they deserve because you keep on hearing the same thing?
So, and that's a really interesting perspective because um, we call it desensitized a good word for it, right? Where after working in like an inpatient setting for so long and hearing so many stories of suicide or sexual assault or something of that nature, then you become desensitized to the topic, right? And a lot of the people that the therapists, medical professionals that are in the field. It's just like, I called I called like my doctor a couple months ago and was like, this is so embarrassing why I'm calling you. I need an appointment. I think maybe I have hemorrhoids or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so embarrassing. And the doctor was like, dude, like we hear about hemorrhoids all the time. It's totally fine, right? It's the same thing with your therapist, right? Like we do listen to this stuff and it does become like overwhelming sometimes, but that's why self-care and self-comfort is so important in the helping field. And it's like I had someone ask me, they were like, well, so what do you do to take care of yourself after you're done with your therapy sessions? And I just kind of laughed because I was like, man, after working with women all day and like hearing so many of these like really depressing stories and like just women go through so much in the world that we have right now, so much. And after hearing these stories of just like how they're mistreated and the how everything is just like there's no equal opportunities, right? And so it's like they were like, what do you do over your spare time? And I'm like, I watch Law and Order SVU. Like I hear stuff about sexual assault all day and then I come home and I watch Law and Order SVU.
Watch
And it's like, yeah, and I'm like, that doesn't, for some reason that makes sense in my
that
brain,
helps you.
like,
That's
yeah, it
how
like,
that works for you.
yeah, and so like every therapist has their own thing. Like I have um one client
Hmm.
in particular, like one therapist that I know, she says she goes on to like full on burrito mode is what she calls it, where she just like wraps herself into like a burrito blanket and just like lives her
Oh
life
wow.
in burrito mode. And so it's like we all have different things that we do. Like there's sometimes where I even come home and I just like scroll through my phone, but I'm not even paying attention to what's on my phone. Like I literally think I'm just here like, just scrolling and scrolling and
Just
scrolling
going
and
through.
scrolling because like it's like I'm just like I'm trying to reset my brain. I'm trying to like get out of the
Yeah, yeah.
funk. And so like, we hear the same stories all the time, but not every story is exactly the same, and it doesn't, I don't ever think it really affects the care that I give my patients, because how they react to it is so different, like on every level, like how they each react to it
Everybody's an
is
individual.
specific. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, everybody's individual story might be in a similar place, but that's uniquely their situation, and so it's like a human story. But I understand that kind of
Hmm.
being able to get, kind of like if you think about a musician that's on stage in front of like 100,000 people, and then suddenly
Yeah,
they're off the stage, and there's
right.
always a problem with that because like how do
Yeah.
you deal with that energy and it's gone? And then the problem is people don't deal with it right. They use
Oh yeah.
substances, they use, to do the wrong thing because like how do you get all that energy and then go from a place like you're in the bus, you're in the plane, you're like you're away from it,
Yeah, for sure.
and
It's
suddenly you were in it. Yeah, I think that kind of situation, you have to find a healthy way to get out of it.
Yes. And I think, like, which fun fact, before I became a therapist, like really like public speaking is one of my big fortes. I can literally like pull anything at my butt and like talk about anything. Like I'm just like that's just one of my talents. And so before I was like it going to do therapy, I was going to do ministry, and before I was going to do ministry, your homegirl in fifth grade decided that she wanted to be the next usher. That's what I really wanted to be, until I realized I did not have any talent whatsoever. Um, but I used to have like a stage in my bedroom, like, and I say a stage because it was a piece of plywood on the carpet, and that was my stage in my bedroom, and I used to like, do little dances and like act out little things and all that kind of stuff. Like performing was something that I loved. I was Sally in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, right before my seventh grade year. And so I was like, I was the stuff. So I understand that it's like that. It's that come down. And I remember, actually, I think it was, wow, you're bringing up all sorts of memories. This is how trauma works, by the way. But yeah, like I remembered that opening night of Your Good Man, Charlie Brown, and then coming home, and it was like I was wired, like I was just like, wow, that was an insane experience, right? Um, so I wouldn't, I don't know if like therapists in particular have that same thing, but it does take me a little bit to turn off therapist mode sometimes,
And
because
kind of
like
come
if you
down and
ask,
turn off. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like my husband, sometimes he'll be like, "Stop therapizing me," and I'm like, "Okay, sorry," like, because sometimes he'll have something that's going
What's going
on, and
on?
then I'm like, I have to fix this, like I have to help him through it, but it's like I can't be a therapist to him. And so he either gets like two different responses from me. It's like either he gets the like completely dissociated Becca, where it's like I'm pretend like I'm listening, but I really don't have the ability to listen to him right now because I've listened so much that day. Or he gets the like, I haven't had enough clients and I'm gonna really fix this problem for you. And so he gets like two different versions of me. There's no like happy middle for that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things with trauma is like what you're saying, like the therapist situations you really can't like they get out of their therapy because they solve the issue or they don't need it
Right.
anymore. But when you're in some kind of like repeating trauma, like because you're like in this situation where you're getting this overload or the burnout, that you continually need to have some kind of therapy. So
Yeah.
is this idea like in your situation, you really can't get over that then, right?
So
You continually have to like have some sessions because you're constantly in the triggering environment.
so I tell a bit when words are working, I promise you. But when people tell me like get over something, right? I tell a lot of people all the time, let's change the narrative, which is like a fun way of saying like we're going to reframe this topic, right? And so, um, a lot of the times when people are really heavy in trauma, the first thing that they'll do when I say, "What's your goal for therapy?" They'll be like, "I want to get over this," and I'm like, "No, you can't do that." And they're just like, why not? And I'm like, because you're going to be dealing with this for the rest of your life, right? Um, so, what I tell people is instead of getting over our trauma, we want to get through our trauma. Okay. So, the way that I
Get it?
explain this
I mean,
is like, a big hedge, right? Like you remember that movie Over the Hedge from a couple of years ago with
mhm.
Hammy the squirrel? Yeah, okay. So it's like I imagine it like that hedge from that movie where it like never ends on either side and there's a big like suburb on the other side of the hedge, right? So when people tell me that they want to get over
Right.
their trauma, yeah, I'm over here. I'm like, dude, what would happen if you got over your trauma, like you got over that hedge, right? It's not happening because as soon as you try to walk on top of a hedge, the first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to fall through. Like you're going to fall through, you're going to get disoriented, you're going to stab yourself with a couple branches. It's going to be like cuts and scrapes all over the place. It'll be really damaging, right? And then not only have you fallen through, but you've fallen on your butt. And now you have to get up while you're scratching yourself all over the place from all these branches and everything. So I tell people, like, if our trauma is the hedge, right, then we have to look at it from like the only way to process and get to the other side is to go through it. And when we're going through our trauma, the best way to do that is to be making a plan as we come up with it. You know, like you don't know what the inside of the hedge looks like until you get to the inside of the hedge. Just like with our trauma, we don't know how deep our trauma goes until we start processing it. So a lot of people think, oh, I can go to therapy and then I can get over it, right? And I'm like, no, you can go to
Mhm.
therapy and we can get through it, right? And so, like, a lot of what I work with when it comes to my clients is understanding how you can get through your trauma and feel all of the emotions that are going on because there's a lot of emotions that are going on when you're going through your trauma, right? And a lot of people, they
Mm,
don't want to
mhm.
grieve, they don't want to have anxiety, they don't want to have depression, they don't want to have any of the side effects of mental health, but unfortunately we do, right? And so it's learning about how to be one with those emotions and not letting those emotions take over us and learning how to have like control of how we work through things.
Isn't it that people try to think they try to think, people are multifaceted, right? So they're thinking they can put something in a box and kind of lock
Yeah.
it away when it's like what I've learned is like there's this whole holistic thing, right? So if you don't take care of the mind, the body, and the heart and the soul, right? If
Hmm.
you only like think, oh, it's logical, which aren't logical. Some things are kind of heart, kind of esoteric. You're trying to put them and think about
Hmm.
logic was it's probably not going to work because some things that
Right.
happened aren't logical, right? They
No.
happened and there was no. So how if you're just going to use your logic brain, how are you going to solve it?
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up the box thing because my dad, he's very much in that same mindset, right? Where he's like just shove it in a box and put it in the back of the closet. And it was like 2 years ago or something. My parents, they decided to do some renovations to their house, and they had to cut out the back half of their closet to expand the room on the other side. And when he showed that to me, I said, Dad, what'd you do with all your trauma? You must have had to move it somewhere else because it was all in the back of the closet. And he was like, oh, shut up. Like,
Mhm.
Um, and so I'm like, it's time for you to go to therapy. And he's like, I don't go to therapy. We don't need you know. So, I mean, really, a lot of the
Old school.
lingo, yeah. I mean, there's a whole generation that's out there that's actually called the bootstrap generation because they coined the term pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get over it, you know. And I'm saying that the nice way because there's a couple choice words that
Mm.
usually end up in that particular sentence, right? But yeah, I mean, like, there's a whole generation out there that really believes that you don't need to work with your feelings, and they believe that they're fine. And it kind of makes me like, you know, I see people from that generation sometimes that are like they're not fine, you know. um I actually had one client that was
Yeah,
like
there's
in
a lot
her
of
early,
problems.
yeah, there's a lot of problems in processing it. And I had one client in her early 20s, and she comes into my office one day, and as soon as she sits on the couch, and as soon as I close the door, just starts wailing, crying her eyes out. And I'm like, well, crap. Okay. Well, what is going on? You know, like like, what do I need to do? You know, and sometimes it's like, you know,
Mhm.
sitting with the client, but and just like letting them have their emotions. But she says, there was an old lady. I mean, she must have been like 80 something that's in the waiting room. And I'm just over here like, this is going to be me for the rest of my life. And I'm going to need therapy forever. And like, I'm never going to get over this stuff. And like, am I going to be the 80-year-old in your waiting room? And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, homegirl, calm down. Like, this is probably like her first time ever going to therapy, you know, like chill out. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah, she's making the
it's that,
assumption they've been there
yeah,
for the whole time.
yeah, yeah. And so it's like you have that fear that's definitely associated with therapy because people think that you know, divulging your deepest, darkest secrets to your therapist, to anybody, is wrong. And really, it's not wrong at all. Like, I welcome people to tell me all of the gossip. I hear everything before everyone else. Like, I just know everything that goes on in the world, except for world news. Like half the time, I'm so in it with my clients all day that I'll come home and my husband will be like, "Hey, did you hear what happened today in the world?" And I'm like, "Nope, not at all."
No.
Like, I only heard what was going on in my client's life. I'm like, "Who got arrested today? Tell me," because I have no idea. So, yeah.
So one of the things like we were talking about, like not the whole idea of getting over it kind of comes from the generation of the bootstrap you were talking about. Um,
Yeah.
there are a lot of times that do you find that a lot of the children of those people have that problem that because it's not
Oh,
just that
yeah.
they won't they didn't do it, but they kind of taught their kids and their grandkids all have that problem because like you are the child of your parents, right? And so like if your
Yep.
parents don't believe in therapy or if they've
Oh,
got
yeah.
reasons why they say, oh, that's not what you should do, you should just like is that do you run into a lot of people that have that problem like the first time they get with you that was a big step for them because they probably would
Oh,
have never
yeah.
they most of the time that voice in their head was, oh, I shouldn't even be here.
Yeah. You know, it's crazy that you asked that question because that's how I was raised. Um, I don't, you know, I say my parents didn't believe in mental health. I don't know if they knew that mental health really existed. Okay. Like, I think that
Mhm.
my dad was so shut off to the idea that feelings could control different things that you do in your life, right? That like he wasn't willing to participate in that type of idea. My mom, on the other hand, she can be a little bit more open when it comes to that stuff. But yeah, when I was growing up, I think it was probably in sixth grade when I had my first panic attack. It was during a standardized test that I was in. And I just remember like sitting there in the middle of doing the test and then being like, oh my gosh, I'm going to throw up all over the place. And so I like asked the teacher if I could go throw up. And then I run to the bathroom, and I'm just like standing in the stall with the door closed, like, Becca, you're not going to throw up. You're not going to allow yourself to throw up. This is not like, you're not going to do this. You're not going to do this. And just like sitting there and like just pressing on my chest, like hitting my chest over and over. And like that was a really common thing that I did at that time when I was having panic attacks, is I would just like hit my chest, and like my chest was so bruised just all the time. And so,
Wow.
um, looking back at that now, like I know that was a panic attack. But my mom took me out of school early because they thought that I was sick. And so she scheduled a doctor's appointment for the next day. And I was fine the next day. Like I had no problems the next day, right? And so the doctor ended up putting me on acid reflux medicine because
Oh, wow.
there's no
You didn't
way that
even
it
think
could have
about
been anxiety. It was like stomach
it. Mhm.
issues, right? And so I took acid reflux medicine from all of middle school and all of high school, um, in order to help. And obviously, nothing changed. I remember, I had, looking back on it now, obviously I had so many panic attacks, and I did not even know that's what it was. And I attempted suicide when I was in seventh grade and when I was in eighth grade. And both of those times, like I didn't even really understand what was going on. I just knew that I didn't want to live that life anymore. Um, and in both of those attempts, I my parents, they didn't know about it until like years later and all that kind of stuff. So I was never hospitalized. So I only really told like a select group of people. But and my friend, I was actually talking about this with a client the other day. I was like, yeah, and now I'm looking back at it, and is my first suicide attempt was right before Valentine's Day. And I remember my best friend at the time got me a Valentine's Day present, and it turned from a Valentine's Day present to a I'm glad you didn't kill yourself present. And so it's like we all have like these different, experiences when we're younger. But I did not know that mental health and anxiety and depression existed until I went to college. And so, my freshman year of college, I had lost 80 pounds over my senior year of high school. And after about 40 pounds, I'd asked the doctor, I was like, hey, I'm not losing any more weight. I need help. And so he put me on Phetermine, which is it's speed for weight loss, basically. And so if you want to try an addiction, then go for Phetermine. No, please don't. Actually, that's a really bad idea. But I definitely was like really into that. And I was like, it was so much stimulation because it's a stimulant, and I lost a lot of weight on it, and people were finally giving me attention for the first time in my life. And then I went away to college, and people were giving me attention then. And when I ran out of my prescription for the Phetermine, I ended up starting to starve myself. And so I would go like 4 or 5 days without eating, and then I would have like a roll with some peanut butter or like a tiny Lunchable or something of that nature. And because I just had so much fear surrounded around food and what people thought about me, and it was really difficult for me to eat. And so it was maybe like 2 or 3 months into my freshman year, and I had gone a couple days without eating. I had told one person that that I became friends with pretty quickly. I said, hey, I've been starving myself, and he wanted to tell a professor, and I was like, no, it's totally fine. I got this under control. But I had passed out. And when they found me, I was like, he knows what's going on. They wheel me over to the nurse's office, which is just like, you know, going in a wheelchair across campus. No one ever wants to do that. Like, that wasn't fun. Made me drink orange juice, which I think orange juice is absolutely disgusting. And then they were like, you're going to get set up with therapy. And I was like, oh man, this
Oh,
sounds awful, because like I had been told, like I kind of knew that therapy
okay.
was bad because that's how I was raised, right? And so it's like we don't talk about our
Yeah.
feelings, right? Like we don't talk about that. That's private, right? And so don't mind HIPAA because like HIPAA is privacy, but like we don't talk about that with even anyone that's
Yeah.
protected by HIPAA, right? And so um the therapist that I had, I mean he was okay. He wasn't the best therapist in the whole entire world. He did tell me that he wouldn't diagnose me with an eating disorder because I wasn't skinny enough to have an eating disorder. So that was not a fun thing. If you're a therapist, don't ever say that to a client that has an eating disorder because that's a bad therapist thing to say.
Yeah.
Um,
Doesn't sound like it was very
yeah,
that wasn't
not a
really
very
well trained.
yeah.
Well, maybe
It
that
was
was
not
where
a
the
very
medical profession
helpful.
was. That's maybe the problem.
Yes,
Did
and
you
that's the
find that
thing.
there's a lot of problems with the way the way women are treated, like in the medical profession or even in therapy, in terms of like not understanding, like they're giving you amphetamines, it's like then
Oh
I think
yeah.
it's like there's like it doesn't look like they're really well thought out or well
Mhm.
researched or understanding or maybe having preconceived conceptions about women and making bad choices about how they should the situation or treat
Yes.
the issues.
So, yes, because I'll tell you, just being, you know, eh, being through the system myself, and weight has been a theme throughout my whole entire life. And so, you know, that experience that I had, I've flipped flopped back and forth. I've lost weight, gained weight, starved myself, haven't starved myself. It goes flip flops back and forth, right? But, recently I was going to a doctor and saying, like, look, I had just lost all this weight and now I'm gaining back weight like nobody's business. I can't stop eating sometimes, but then other times I'm really eating less than 1,000 calories and I'm still gaining weight. And I'm like showing them all these things. Like I've looked up insulin resistance, I've looked up, early signs for diabetes, and all this kind of stuff. And I provide all of these things, all these tests, all these things that I do. Well, it's low, but you're still within normal range, so you should be fine. And I'm like, should be fine and am fine are two totally different things. So it's like, I need you to take me seriously.
Mhm.
But I mean, women just aren't taken seriously. And then you get on the other side of the coin with women that are helping professionals, and you find women that are going to women, female doctors, um, so they can feel like they're being heard. But it just depends on the system that the medical professional is in. You know, when I was working inpatient at the psychiatric hospital, like that was one of the hardest jobs that I ever did because part of my job was doing intakes and group therapy. But you would have these people that would come in with one of the worst traumas that they ever experienced in their life, literally almost like being found bleeding to death, or they were maybe saved from like hanging themselves or something of that nature, or they tried an overdose. And then they're like, Becca, I need to talk to you. Miss Becca, can I talk to you? Becca, 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 I need to talk to you. And then I'm like, I can't talk to you because I have to do paperwork. Or I can't talk to you because I have to do this thing. Or I can't talk to you because I have to do that thing. And so it also depends on the facility
The
that you're working on.
bureaucracy.
Yeah. And so it's like, that was one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I did not
The
last in
bureaucracy
that
was
position. Yeah.
yeah, it sounds
It
like
was
the
rough.
bureaucracy wasn't attentive to their patients. Like they were so into like
Mm-mm.
a bureaucratic structure that they were forced in all this paperwork for whatever reason. But
Yes. Yes.
yeah, that's not
It's
very effective.
it it's so difficult, and that's one of the reasons why I opened up my own practice, is because I just was so frustrated with the way that different places were treating patients. And
Mm,
so um I I have clients like I've worked, the suicide prevention lifeline, the crisis text line, the Arkansas crisis line. I suicide has been like a really common theme in my career, and so like it's not. necessarily that I'm desensitized to it because it's still like pretty um it's a big adrenaline rush when you have a client that tells you that they want to kill themselves, right? But you get to a point where you've worked around it so much that you understand the level that your patients are at, and you know like
Something like that.
how
Hmm.
serious they are, and you know like um well, it's like we understand like, is this just intrusive thoughts, or is this like something that we can, use a certain skill to work through it? But it's like this takes lots and lots of listening skills. And unfortunately, the reason why we're going through such a huge mental health crisis now is because all of these community clinics that offer mental health counseling, they can't keep up with the amount of clients that need it, right? And so they're like, oh, they're not hiring therapists because they can't afford to hire therapists because they're spending money on stupid stuff, right? And then it's like the therapists, they have, 60 patient caseloads. And it's like, you can't see 60 patients in a 40-hour work week. That doesn't compute, right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, some of them you
How are
can
you gonna do
see,
that? Yeah.
every
Yeah.
other week or something of that nature. And it's like, well, who am I to decide that, right? And so the mental health crisis that we're in right now,
Yeah.
I'm just going to assure your listeners, like, there are plenty of therapists that are out there. There are therapists that specialize in
Yeah.
certain skills. There's therapists that take insurance. There's therapists that do self-pay. There's a lot of them that own their own practices. You don't have to go to your community clinic in order to get mental health care. Like, there's plenty of therapists that are out there. The problem is, like, you know cost, right? People think, well, therapy is too
Yeah.
expensive. I mean, let them check your benefits for your insurance. If you don't have insurance, there are so many interns that are out there. It's ridiculous. Like
Oh,
interns
so
are basically
there's ways to get
free
to it.
or low cost.
Oh,
Yeah, there's so many different ways. And
yeah, a lot of
so,
people don't probably I would just add there's a lot of people feel like if they go through their HMO or their PPO or whatever, and they can't, and then they have a this is the problem. I think I would just go into one thing. Like if you work in, corporate America and you get a plan, the problem is the mental health plans are treated like we'll give you 10 visits. How do you know that 10 visits is going to do it? Right? It doesn't isn't
right.
treated like cancer. You're only going to give a cancer patient 10 visits. You give it to them as many as they need. A
Yeah.
diabetic, it's an ongoing thing. But the idea that it's limited, so we only do 5 visits or 10 visits. I've been in plans from big companies that's the way
Yeah.
they approach it. And I think that's the problem. That they approach it from
Oh,
this idea that it's like, oh, we can get
yeah.
like 10 visits and that's enough.
Well, and insurance is ridiculous to work with. And so you see some clinicians that want to do self-pay only, and they don't want to work with the insurance companies, which is understandable because charging insurance can create a backlog of getting paid, and
And they
we're
don't pay you.
independent
They don't
pay.
want to pay you.
Yeah,
They don't want to
or
pay.
they don't.
And that's the whole
Yeah,
point.
and then you're over here, you're like, oh my gosh, like it's like your therapist is over here struggling for money because they like you don't know how many therapists that are out there that a very common theme among all therapists is just guilt because we can't help everybody, right?
Mhm.
And so we get people that are like, I can't afford this. And then it's a horrible feeling as a therapist to be like, well, I can't afford to keep you pro bono because I have to put dinner on the table,
Well, you
right?
gotta pay your
And then
mortgage
it's
too.
yeah, and it's like how do you turn someone down that you could do amazing work with, right? That it's like you can't afford to keep that person as a client because you have to feed yourself, right? And so I definitely a lot of the insurance stuff that goes on, you know, we need really good mental health benefits across the board in the United States. And all the insurance
Yeah, I think
companies
there's
got on
yeah.
this. Yes, they got on the same
Okay,
page during
okay,
COVID and they did telehealth care, free for people with like different insurance
yeah,
plans. But
but
then they're
they
like,
don't.
"Oh, the pandemic's over. We're good." Like, it's not over.
Yeah, well, there's
We're not good.
well, you go to China and there's 60 million people in China getting COVID like weekly, and
Yeah,
I could go into all kinds of things. Sometimes things aren't over if they're not over. But at the end of the
exactly.
day, the problem I think is mental health is not looked at like your typical illness, and it should be
Exactly.
like any illness. And just because you can't put it in the category of like high blood pressure or diabetes, it has the same effect. It can take you off the planet, like a heart attack.
Mhm.
So
Right.
like you should take it seriously, but it seems like the capitalist system doesn't take it seriously. It doesn't look at it
No.
at the same weight, and it really people are going to have to really kind of challenge the politicians to make them understand that once you get
Well,
into a situation and you
yeah.
need it, then people would need to
Yes.
understand, oh, well, now I want to advocate for it. But if you don't know anybody or you're not handling it, you say that's the foo because like your grandpa said it was foo foo and your uncle said it was foo foo. So you don't think it needs to be in there. So I think that's the problem is that
Exactly.
pervasive culture for that generation
Yes.
is still in the structure of the system.
And
So it's
it's
not just them. Like
absolutely. And no, we're really, and I've been saying this for a hot minute, like we really need Gen Z to save us, is really what it comes down to. Like we need Gen Z to step up and vote and get into
My
our
daughter is gonna
platforms.
save
Yeah,
us.
yes, yes. Like we need Gen Z to save us because I think like millennials, and it's I grew up in a very conservative Christian South Arkansas. Like it very conservative area, and
Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah, and I remember the first time that I was able to vote was um, Barack Obama's second term. And my so fun story. My original degree in college was radio, television, video, strategic communication, and broadcasting. And so for election
Oh, wow.
night, we're covering election night like live on our like college news channel and all
Oh, like
that
a
kind of
TV,
stuff.
college TV,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
college TV
And
channel.
we're at the courthouse. Like, this is where I could vote, right? But like, I had so much guilt about wanting to vote for Obama. And I was like, my dad would not approve of this. I mean, actually, he definitely would not approve of it. Like, if you want to compare my dad to someone, it's Tim Allen on Last Man Standing. Like, that's the same person. Okay. And, so like my I didn't vote. Like I remember like I was like I'm not going to vote because I don't want to disappoint my parents. I think Gen Z is at a place where they literally are so mad because of everything that's happening in this world and like all the school shootings and just like how they're
Yeah, the
constantly living
reluctance
in
to handle
fear.
things.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just
My
like
daughter is a my daughter is a mental health advocate. She's an artist that
yeah.
advocates for artists with disabilities, and she's a big Gen Zer. She's like 23,
Yeah.
right? And
Oh,
she's like
nice.
in this a lot of groups actually pushing, for voting rights for college kids. You got people who are
Yeah.
trying to limit voting rights for college kids because they don't vote for a certain group.
Right. Right.
It's like,
Right.
yeah. So I'm
Well,
like, really? It's like, just
yeah. Well, it doesn't matter at this point. It's like everyone is just so divided thanks to who, that it's just like we I'm sometimes like just call him Voldemort at this point, like just say his name, right? Because like our country got so divided during those
yeah.
4 years, and it was just like it was okay to be
Mhm.
divided. Like he like promoted the division, right? And it was just like
Yeah. It's like
be
divide and
be your
conquer.
freak
There's
self.
a reason why people
Yes.
divide and conquer. Yeah, what yeah, there's a
Yes.
reason why.
Yeah.
It
So like
strategy
mental,
that if you
yeah,
check, yeah,
I mean, mental health has
yeah. I
literally
mean, it's a
gone
problem
down the
worldwide.
toilet
We
because of it. Yeah.
well, yeah, that authoritarianism is actually a big plague going across Western civilization and Eastern, and even country. It's
Yeah.
actually a new theme because
Right.
we're running out of resources. Different types of people are getting in positions they weren't in. And so when you have
Right.
scarce resources, I was a sociology and political science major. It was kind of
Oh
predicted
yeah.
when I was in school that the scarcity of resources would cause societal structure problems like we have and cause like
Right.
oligarchy and cause this kind of authoritarianism. And I
Yeah.
was in classes where professors were pointing out like a thesis that you could get totalitarian or authoritarian and kind of this oligarchy type of structure. And you see it actually occurring a lot.
Yeah.
It's not just
Yeah.
in the East or in the West too. And it's
Right.
really a symptom of where we are because, people didn't
Yeah.
pay attention to the planet. But,
Yeah.
we're kind of dealing with it.
I we are dealing with it, and it's just like we're in such a crazy spot in our world right now, and I feel like the mental health is just declining so much because we're not listening to each other. Like
Mhm.
we're told that we can be around people and not listen to them, and I think that social media has played such a big role in that. Like you can just unfollow someone that you don't agree
Yeah.
with or something like that, which I mean, like, boundaries are good, don't get me wrong, but then we also have the opposite end of the spectrum, which are the keyboard warriors that just say a whole bunch of crap on social media all the time. And I mean, I can't tell you how many women I work with on a daily basis that are, upset in tears about the standards that they have to uphold on social media to
It's
let the
terrible.
world know that their life is good. And I'm like, you don't have to put shit on social media if you don't want to. I mean, like, you can
But it's
do
a peer
whatever.
pressure. Yeah, it's like a peer
Yeah.
pressure, and even think about the kids. The
Yes.
teenagers are getting especially women,
Yes.
are being forced to go into paradigms that are kind of they're very sexist, and
Yeah.
it's, like, not possible. It's over exaggerated, kind of, like, unhealthy images of
Right.
what you should be that will cause you to have an eating disorder. That could
Yes.
cause you to go and hate yourself and it's not right. It's just being done because it makes money. The problem I
Right.
have, is that you have systems that don't have the consider morality or consider justice. You just like, oh, if it makes money, that's okay. So tell the kids to do a TikTok challenge
Right.
that actually can put them in a hospital. Like
And
that
and
just because it makes money, that isn't good.
it doesn't pan out. I mean, like,
you know,
there's so many
that's
different societal factors of like why our mental health goes down the toilet, right? And it's like I tell people, and I'm really not ashamed to admit this because I think that there's very few things that people should be ashamed of in this world, right? Because we just need to start talking more openly to each other. But
yeah.
growing up in the environment that I grew up in, like being a part of the church, like I was sex shamed like no one's business when I was a teenager. You're taught as a freaking sixth grade girl that if you have sex before marriage or you masturbate or you do anything like that, then all of a sudden, like, you're a horrible human being. But good God, if a guy has sex before marriage, like, up here, right?
He's all right.
Like,
Yeah, he's
way,
okay.
way to go, right? Like, and I'm
Yeah,
like, dude,
double standard.
where's
It's like
it's a it's such a double
it's a
standard,
crazy
but it's
standard. It's a
yes,
crazy standard.
and
Yeah, it's like, it's not right. It's just kind of like it's a very,
yes,
top down kinda
right,
hierarchical kinda like, they just wanna control everything, and you can see what's going on. They're trying
yes,
to control women to an the nth degree. And they've
And
gone back to like the 1700s to justify
absolutely.
doing something in the 21st century. You're going back to the 1700s. I'm a government major, right? And
Right.
what they're quoting is stuff from the 1700s. And I'm like,
And
really? We're in the
well,
21st century. We didn't have rocket ships in the 1700s. So we're going to go back and say,
right,
hey, so I guess we can't go to Mars because we
right.
didn't have rockets in 1700. So I guess you can't go to Mars.
Right. Well, it's like when we had our elections last year, and we had an incredible candidate that was running for governor. I mean, I don't understand how he didn't win, because I feel like even, like a conservative person could have appreciated him, because of how good his campaign was. But the person that we ended up getting, God bless our souls for the next 4 years until she decides to run for president and take over the world. And she'll probably get it because God forbid, right? But in this, when I was talking with the person that I wanted to win for governor, Chris Jones, Dr. Chris Jones, who was a rocket scientist and a pastor. I mean, God forbid, okay? But, I digress. When I was talking to some of his campaign managers, I was like, hey, I'm a mental health professional. I want to talk to you guys about, sex in Arkansas, because Arkansas is one of the highest rated states for teen pregnancy. Okay. Which
Yeah,
is
that makes
par
sense.
for the course, because we're so religious down here, right? And we keep telling people, like, don't get pregnant or you'll die.
Or
And
no
so what
sex
do we?
education. If you don't have
No
sex
sex
education, you
education.
might have sex. Yeah, well,
Right.
what do you think's gonna
And
happen?
so, like, but people just want to ignore this stuff, right? And so I'm talking to these campaign managers. I'm like, we could literally have incredible sex education for kids. Like, we could talk about this stuff, we could use the correct language, and we could have these conversations about sex. And she was 100% on board with me, understanding everything that I was talking about. But at the same time, it's like, going back into my seventh and eighth grade year, um, I remember that's when my best friend got her first kiss. And I was so jealous because, like, that was a big deal, right? And I hadn't had any boyfriends or anything like that at that point. And so I remember getting on my desktop computer, which was, the family computer, and Googling how to kiss, right? And what was the first thing that popped up? Pornhub.
Yeah.
Okay, like that's
Oh, yes,
literally what it was.
that's
And
not the
then,
best thing to happen.
right. And so it's like, then I remember, like, clicking on those links and watching those videos, and then being like, I don't look like any of those women. I'm not able to do any of those things. And then literally going and making myself sick so that way I could look like those women, right? And it's
Yeah, that's
like,
the problem
this
with
is what,
the internet.
right.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
this is what we're
it's a
doing to
really
women.
damage yeah, it's damaging, like, to everybody because, like, if men, if that's how they see how they interact with women, then they
Right.
don't
Right.
interact properly, right? And then women get unrealistic expectations to look like what they see, and that's not
Right.
it's fake. It's kind of, it's
Well,
all kind of, like, over exaggerated
yeah.
fake, so what are you gonna it's not real. It's not real,
Yes.
really what the interaction that you should have. Not that you make a
And
judgment, people can do whatever they want, but it seems like it's
yeah.
more derogatory and it's taking advantage. So it doesn't
Well,
seem like
and
it's equal.
yes, and I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you're gonna watch porn, go for it. Watch porn safely. Like, don't download shit. God forbid, don't do that, right? But I'm like, I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you're gonna watch it safely. But these teenagers that are watching it, and that's where they're getting their sex education, and then they're getting themselves pregnant because none of these porns have condoms in it, right? And nobody's talking
Yeah,
about birth control, right? And it's like,
at all.
this is
Yeah,
why it's like so good. It's okay for a guy to have sex when they're in high school, because they're not getting pregnant, right? But then we have where I'm now
Well,
in
you're
a
still getting
state,
STDs. You're still getting
right?
STDs.
Oh, but we pretend like those don't exist around here. But I mean, like now it's like I'm in a state where it's the highest rate of teen pregnancies. And now we have, Roe v. Wade got overturned and we can't have abortions in Arkansas anymore.
I
And
guess they're
then
all
they're
gonna
going to,
get married. I guess they're
yeah,
gonna try to force them all to get married.
oh yeah, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, our foster care system is going out of control and we have too
What do you
many
expect?
kids. Well, what do you expect, right? Like you're trying to do stuff before stuff is even in place for
Well,
things to
the thing
be
about
fixed.
society, you think about people have these expectations, right? They have on
Right.
these kids, they make them have the kids, right? But this isn't the
Right.
age where you could go work in a factory and then buy a house. This is the
No.
age when you go work at McDonald's and you can't afford an apartment, right? So,
No, I
so
know.
the idea. Yeah. So how are you gonna get all these kids that actually have jobs that can
Yeah.
fund having, and then they're the first ones to say no assistance, no,
Yeah.
no like maternity aid, no, but you're gonna make them have the kids, but you're not gonna pay for
Yep.
the healthcare. You're not gonna pay for the
Right.
food. You're not gonna. So how?
Right.
What is it? Seems like punishment. What are you just into punishment,
Right.
or you really care about life? My whole point is if
And
you really care about life,
yeah.
then you should pay for all the kids.
Exactly. And but that doesn't compute. And so it's like
It's
I
not.
I really like this is I really think that mental health is so vital to this because all of these politicians, especially in Arkansas that are coming up with these things, y'all need to go to therapy and y'all need to get therapy from a liberal therapist so you can understand which way is up, right? But I mean like
It's
I'm
all
very
repressed. They already got a lot of repressed feelings. I mean, they got a
oh
lot of,
yeah.
like you said,
Yeah.
they're running like the 70-year-old, 80-year-old
Yes.
mentality,
Yes.
pointing to a very small group of people that seem to have enough money to give them money, right? To keep the
Exactly.
people on pushing these ideas that
Yep.
don't fit the 21st century, don't
Yep.
fit the global environment, right?
Right.
Most companies are internationally global. They deal
Right.
with people from all over the world, all different types of people.
Right.
So you suddenly
Yep.
are going to tell an international corporation that you don't like this type of person or you don't
Yep.
like this type of thing. But those international companies, they're not going to do that, right?
No.
So
No.
so how is your kid going to compete,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Uh, It doesn't. It just doesn't
Doesn't
pan
compute.
out. It
Doesn't compute.
doesn't. It doesn't. No, you're right. That the numbers don't add up, and it's like I I wanted to, part of my mission and being a therapist is I want to be real and authentic, and I want people to know what they're getting when they come to therapy with me,
You're real. You're,
and
I
I
like the fact that you're willing to talk,
thank you.
the way you're talking, because a lot of people, it kind of shows, the realness in your approach, because some
Well,
people
I
are
appreciate
not
that.
willing to speak what we've been speaking.
I think that it's very scary to, in the world that we live in, it's just like when Roe v. Wade got overturned, I saw this one person that had this bumper sticker on their car that said, it was something in support of Roe v. Wade. And I was like, oh, I want to get something like that. And I just remember my husband saying, like, I love you and I support you and I support you and like all women. He's like, but if you get that here, like I'm afraid for you. Like we
Yeah, yeah.
live
You make yourself a target.
it.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. And people don't, they're like, oh well, the people that don't care, they're like, psh. And I'm like, you don't understand what women deal with. Like women don't even want to talk to women about their feelings on these topics because there's some women that don't even want to support women because they've been
yeah.
so ingrained with these ideologies from different religions and cultures and whatnot, and it's like we're
But it's not
allowed to think
the
outside the box.
conditioning. It's people who have been,
Yes.
yeah, but people have been conditioned. And you got, it's kind of like, when people don't vote their self interest, like in political science, one thing we would study is like, you get a person that's like blue collar and they're voting for the interest of a free oligarch. The
Right.
oligarch doesn't want to pay for the bridge, doesn't want to pay for the fire department, doesn't want to pay for their school. And then somehow the blue collar guy working at the factory aligns with the oligarch and doesn't understand that like they're not likely to be that oligarch. And they
Right.
actually have some people in their family on social security disability, on
Right.
Medicaid,
Right.
getting aid for
I
dependent families with children. And somehow they think that maybe they're going to win the lottery and be
Yeah.
that guy? They're probably not.
Yeah.
And so, like, they vote against their own interest and thinking that
Yep.
they're gonna line with the boss. When
Yeah.
are
And
you
it
gonna
doesn't
be, like, in the boss's neighborhood? When are you gonna live there?
it doesn't work like that. And I feel like that's part of the reason why I try and be like as authentic as possible, and I try to make mental health care, I know you've had my link up a couple times for my online courses, and this is a big part of what I decided to do because I noticed that I was talking about trauma and talking about so many different things, right? And helping people like work through these different negative cognitions and distortions and the intrusive thoughts. And so I developed online courses because I really wanted to help people have better access to mental health care, and I wanted it to be robust. So I created these mini courses. They're like 30-minute videos of me talking and teaching a concept, and then I have a full-fledged workbook. Yes, my workbooks are pink. That's my color scheme. If y'all have a problem with pink, then get over it because it's all pink, okay? But I made them really accessible. They're $27. I'm giving 10% off with the code GHOST for all of your listeners. So if you're listening to this and you want to go check out my mini courses, it's beccafergusonlpc.com/online courses. And you can use the word ghost for any of my mini courses. Those are the ones that are $27. I have one on the window of tolerance, SMART goals, the wise mind, and my favorite is self-care versus self-comfort. So if you want to check those out, you're more than welcome to do that.
I think that's
Um,
a great thing to offer to our audience, and, I think people need to take the first step because, like, a lot of times people have been conditioned, they're not able to live the life they want to, and when they take the first step of actually realizing there's something wrong, actually, taking that step, that's a big step. And when you have
yeah.
people like yourself who are willing to help people, and having online is good because then you have that access when you don't necessarily have to go through the
Yeah.
structure we were talking about, where the bureaucracy. People can get to people the help they need, and don't
Yes.
despair because there are people out there that can
Yes.
help, and you can maybe set them on the right direction. And I think that's always good because people
Mm,
need to be present, people need to be aware, and
mm.
then start to listen to their own inner voice, and then you
Yes.
make feel that if you're not feeling right, then maybe you need to do something about it.
I
So
I think that, these courses are like a really good first step because it's therapy without therapy, if that makes sense. Like you're
mhm,
listening to the video, you're getting, all the advice from a licensed professional therapist, but at the same time, like you're not making yourself vulnerable to where you're telling all of your deep dark secrets to someone. And so like this is a good place for you to start and do some reflection on your own and then decide if like that therapy world is something that you want. And I was talking with my husband about this last weekend. I'm thinking about running a really big contest soon, and I'm hoping to get people to sign up for my courses because I'm thinking that, the first like 200 courses that I sell, I might give away like something really big, like some like $100, $200 prize or something of that nature. And so I'm looking for
yeah, that's
people to
cool.
hop on and get those courses. If you're not going to get that course just for the therapy part of it, get it so you can win something because I'm going to do a big prize, and I am like very determined to get these courses into the hands of everybody that I know. And so yeah, if you got $27, really it's like 24.50 or something like that with your discount code. So go ahead and get on there and get these courses and learn something about yourself and spread the concepts to other people too.
Well, thank you for being on the program. I appreciate the coupon code. of Ghost for the 10% off the mini courses. I think that's cool for the audience to check that out. And I am a firm believer in talking to therapists. And we had many therapists on the show. We started to expand that last year from just talking to musicians and creators. We'd start realizing that you need to be kind of expansive and talk to
Yeah.
like all types of people, because a lot of creative people or any types of people need help, and we didn't want to just be talking about music all the time, so we expanded our approach and
Yeah.
our content to be wider. And
Yeah.
it's been a really cool thing to be able to talk to people outside my area of expertise. But it's yeah, I've been able to do it, and I think it's cool to bring voices like yourself on the show so people can
Yeah.
hear what that's about. And I think this website will help people. That will be clickable on
Yeah.
Facebook and YouTube and all the other places. Like I said, we'll have a landing page for your audience where they can listen or watch the podcast wherever they want to, and that link will be clickable when it's on like Apple or Spotify or iHeartRadio or Amazon, the different places that we're going
Yeah.
to be at. So
Love
that
it.
will be easier for them to get to it because you'll just be able to click through on it. So thank you
Perfect.
again for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a great night and on the Fan Electric podcast.